Shabbat Shalom. Good to see so many of you braving the rain of Los Angeles to gather here on Shabbat. Welcome to everyone who is joining us virtually. And we're going to get to experience some of the joy and some of the reflection of Shabbat together. And we'll start with words of Hine Matov, just how good and sweet it is for all of us to be with one another. We're on page 10. Shabbat from different places. Many of us here are mourners. Many of us here are coming with a sense of joy. I wanted to share this poem. It's called Here, to help move us into this transition of Shabbat. When the world is about to crush me with all of its weight, I find safety here. When people have been too cruel because of their ignorance, I find compassion here. When my government tries to silence me, I find my voice here. When I feel a sense of helplessness during these uncertain times, I find peace here. When I'm lost and tossed about in the day-to-day maze of activity, I find direction here. When loneliness slowly creeps into my life like the evening mist, I find community here. When I feel isolated at times, I find comfort here. When friends seem nowhere to be found in the daily grind, I find good friends here. When I sometimes lose sight of what I can do for the community, I find purpose here. When I feel that my family is scattered hundreds of miles away, I find the nearness of family here. When I feel that the cacophony outside is too much and I just need to be soothed, I find beautiful music here. When I run around and take the simple things for granted, I find meaning here. And when I'm gone and have left only my name, I know that I will be remembered here. We move into our Kabbalat Shabbat. These are really our warm-up prayers to help us move from the traffic or from the rain or from the work or whatever it is that brought us into this space. These prayers slowly help us shift our mindset from all of the noise out there to just for this brief amount of time being present here together. And so we'll do that with words of Lechu Neranana. They're on your handouts, bottom right corner.
us listen with all of our hearts to hear God's voice. Neranina, yai, lai, lai, yai, yai, Adonai, yai, lai, lai, yai, Maria, yai, lai, lai, yai, yai, Litzur Yishenu, yai, lai, lai, yai, 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 yai,
We are on page 20, and we greet Shabbat as we might greet partners who are coming together in love at a wedding. We are going to be doing verses 1, 2 on page 20, and 5 and 9 on 21.
Lechadodi likrat kala yarada 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 b'nei Shabbat mikavela. Lechadodi likrat kala yarada 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 b'nei Shabbat mikavela. Shamor v'zachor v'dibur echad yishmi'anu Ushmo echad, Hashem u'tiferet b'chila. Lechadodi likrat kala yarada 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 b'nei Shabbat mikavela. Lechadodi likrat kala yarada 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 b'nei Shabbat mikavela. Shabbat lechu v'nelcha ki mekor ha'meracha merosh mikedem nesucha sof ma'aseh b'machshavas tchila. Lechadodi likrat kala yarada 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 b'nei Shabbat mikavela. Daveri, Kvod Adonai, Alayich Nigla. Lechadodi likrat kala yarada 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 b'nei Shabbat mikavela. Lechadodi likrat kala yarada 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 b'nei Shabbat mikavela.
Bottom of 21, we rise and face the entrance.
Boi v'shalom ateret bala gam b'simcha u'v'tzola toch emunei am segula boi chala boi chala lechadodi likrat kala yarada 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 b'nei Shabbat mikavela. Lechadodi likrat kala yarada 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 b'nei Shabbat mikavela. One more time. lecha dodi likrat kala yada 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 b'nei Shabbat nekabela lecha dodi likrat kala yada 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 b'nei Shabbat nekabela.
We continue standing and turn to page 28.
Ya la la 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 Baruchu et Adonai Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam va'ed Le'olam va'ed Yalla la 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 Yalla la la.
We'll continue standing for just a few moments. And there is a Hasidic teacher, his name is Menachem Mendel of Kotsk, and he once asked, in this prayer we're about to say, first we'll do Shema, and then afterwards V'ahavta. And he says, why does this verse in the V'ahavta say, and these words that I command you on this day shall be al levavecha, which means on your heart. Why aren't these words in your heart? And the reason, he said, is that you can't always put something in your heart, that sometimes your heart is closed and it's not really ready to listen or to receive. And that at those times, all we can do is place words on our hearts in the hope that one day our hearts will open and that the words will be able to fall in. And it makes me think about our practice of prayer, which is that it really is a heart-opening exercise. And it's not meant to be a passive one. It's meant to be an action on ourselves, to think about how we can expand our hearts more widely, how we can listen to each other a bit more intently, and how we can really expose ourselves more vulnerably. And that through this process, we may see the sacred both inside of ourselves and both amongst ourselves, and that this transformative process is really how those words move from being on our hearts, as our teacher says, to being inside of our hearts. So as we join together in these words of Shema, and then in these words of V'ahavta, a chance for all of us to consider how we might just open ourselves up to allow that process to happen even just a bit. We'll join together on page 34.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. 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 Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך, ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך, ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם להות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
We are very lucky because in our community we get to have many students at Hebrew Union College who are studying to be future rabbis. And we have two of our rabbinic interns who are here today. We have Julia over there, and we have Jessica Jacobs over here, who's going to become a rabbi in just 2 months. Yeah, so she's here to help lead our service with us tonight.
When we think about freedom, we often think about freedom from enslavement, freedom from oppression, freedom from fear. But what if instead we decided to think about freedom as freedom to? Freedom to celebrate, freedom to sing, freedom to choose, freedom to live our lives with dignity. As the Israelites stood upon the shores of the Red Sea, they experienced freedom from the narrowness of Egypt, from the enslavement that they had just experienced. But they also experienced freedom too, to finally hope and to dream of the possibilities of their future. So as we join together for Micha Mocha tonight, I want you to imagine, what might we do to create a world in which all people have the freedom to dream, the freedom to hope, and the freedom to live lives filled with dignity? What a beautiful world that could be.
Amen.
We join together in Micha Mocha on page 40.
כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נהדר בקודש, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה. מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקע הים לפני משה ומרים, זה אלינו ואמרו, ואלינו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. On our supplements, we'll find the prayer Hashkivenu. There's this incredible midrash about Hashkivenu, about what it means and why it's in our prayer service. And there are a lot of questions as to why it's here. And there's one comment about why Hashkivenu is here. And there's a question about the importance of peace in the world. The importance of peace in the world. And Hashkivenu is our prayer. It's not necessarily our prayer for peace, but it's our prayer for thinking about a shelter, thinking about, it literally uses the word sukkah, a sukkah, thinking about a sukkah of peace. And when we think about a sukkah of peace, this one comment in the Midrash says, peace is so important in our world. It's so, so important, and it's so valued that even a sukkah of peace is something that we want. A sukkah is something that is vulnerable. A sukkah is something that is flimsy, that it comes apart, maybe in some wind or some rain or some hail. I guess if we had sukkah a month ago, we might have had hail on our sukkah. Snow on our sukkah. But this is to say that peace is so important even when it's a sukkah of peace. And so I invite you to, as we enter Shabbat and as you leave this evening and as you wake up tomorrow morning, to give yourselves the sukkah of peace that you need for this Shabbat. And that might differ depending on who you are. So we'll turn to our supplements for Hashkivenu. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu Leshalom, Leshalom, Vehamidenu Malkeinu Lechayim, Ufros Aleinu Sukat Shlomecha, Ufros Aleinu Sukat Shlomecha, Shelter us beneath thy wings, O Adonai. Guard us from all harmful things, O Adonai. Keep us safe throughout the night, till we wake with morning's light. Teach us, God, wrong from right. Amen. 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 Just our voices. Amen. 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 Amen.
We join together in the Amidah on page 46. And for those who are able, I'll invite you to please rise.
Adonai sifatai tiftach ufi yagid tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise.
48.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu. Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Ve'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor ve'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, Ve'Koneh Hakol, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה.
50.
אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב והושיע, משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומידו מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי הכל.
Page 52.
אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום, יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש.
We continue in silence through page 62. You can pray the words of the Amidah or just take some time for yourself and pray whatever it is that you need to say or whatever it is that you need to hear on this Shabbat. This past week, many of you may have read the article from Thomas Friedman in the New York Times. It's entitled, "American Jews, You Have to Choose Sides." And it reminds us of how, as American Jews, our relationship with Israel is often fraught, and how complicated our own relationships as Jews can be. And it also reminds us that in this moment, the stakes are just too high for us not to engage in this conversation. It's too high when Israelis in the West Bank ignite a Palestinian town on fire in violent retaliation after the murder of 2 Israeli brothers. It's too high when Israel's own finance minister publicly declares that this entire West Bank Palestinian town should be wiped out in revenge. And it's too high when the Israeli government seeks to disrupt the balance of power by limiting the independence of the judiciary, really putting the democracy of our Jewish state in grave danger. And I wrote today in my Shabbat message about the importance of waiting, how sometimes we really need that clarity for discernment. And I want to say that this is not one of those moments that, like the thousands of Israelis who have been protesting in the streets in Israel, we too have to decide as American Jews what we are going to be willing to tolerate. And so for our prayer for Israel tonight, really hopefully a prayer for peace, I want to share these words that Thomas Friedman alluded to. They're words from his synagogue that takes excerpts from Israel's Declaration of Independence. The state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, on justice, and peace, as envisioned by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, of race, of sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions. And it will be faithful to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. Let us pray that these words will continue to guide Israel's leaders and its people. May Israel remain a place where that still small voice is heard. Let its leaders resist the temptation to believe that might makes right. Strengthen the hands of those who defend Israel's borders, its security, its democracy, and upholds a government which enshrines the principles of equal justice and moral accountability. Let us together pray for peace.
Peace will come, and let it begin with me. Oh, we need peace, and let it begin with me. Oh, my own life is all I can hold to control. Oh, let my life be lived for the good of my soul. Let it bring peace, sweet peace. Peace will come, and let it begin with me. Peace will come, and let it begin with me. Oh, we need peace, and let it begin with me. Oh, my own life is all I can hold to control. Oh, let my life be lived for the good of my soul. Let it bring peace, sweet peace. Peace will come, and let it begin with me. Oh, peace will come, peace will come, yes, and peace will come, and let it begin with me. Oh, peace will come, peace will come, yes, and peace will come, and let it begin with me. Oh, peace will come, peace will come, yes, and peace will come, and let it begin with me. Oh, peace will come, peace will come, yes, and peace will come, and let it begin with me. Oh, peace will come, peace will come, yes, and peace will come, and let it begin with me.
Shabbat Shalom. I have a little bit of a confession to make to you all. As Rabbi Bernie mentioned before, I'm going to be ordained as a rabbi in 2 months' time. But I still don't have a regular Shabbat practice. During my time in school, I've toyed with different practices, trying to figure out how I connect with the Shabbat liturgy. I've attended and led different prayer services. I've tried to find a connection with nature. Some weeks on Shabbat, I sleep in. Others, I read books. I have dinners with my friends. I go to my favorite park by the beach. Sometimes I spend my Saturdays wandering around this city, trying to feel connected to something. Each practice has moved me in its own way. It's allowed me to tap into a unique aspect of Shabbat, but I've never found a way to consistently organize them together to make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. I leave Shabbat each week feeling just a little incomplete, like I missed out on something amazing that I couldn't quite grasp. You might ask, why work so hard to create a practice where one seemingly doesn't want to exist? Frankly, it's simple. Shabbat is the foundation of the Jewish calendar. It's the foundation of Jewish life. It grounds us each and every week, reminding us that we are human, that we are created in the image of God, and that we are set apart from the rest of the natural world by our ability to stop and rest. It gives us the ability to renew our bodies and our souls every 7 days. How to observe Shabbat has been a question as long as Jews have had the practice. Is Shabbat about refraining from work, or is it about resting? Is there a difference between the two ideas? We're commanded to remember and keep Shabbat, but what does that actually mean? Is Shabbat about the mitzvah in and of itself, or is it about what the practice can do for us spiritually? How do we interpret old Shabbat practices to feel relevant today? And so the exploration of Shabbat continues. In an attempt to better understand the laws of Shabbat and how I might find meaning in them, I've been engaging in a weekly study group with a professor and some of my classmates on Hilchot Shabbat, the laws of Shabbat observance. Each week, we read a different section of a book called Keeping Shabbat, a guide to practical observance of Shabbat by Orthodox Israeli Jewish law expert Rabbi Yehoshua Neuwirth. Rabbi Neuwirth is impeccably detailed, considering every possible aspect of modern life in his assessment of the forbidden and allowed practices for a lawfully orthopraxic Shabbat observance. He covers topics all the way from what games you can play, how to do dishes, how you can shower, and how to avoid the appearance of doing something unlawful, even if the action itself is allowed. You see, traditionally, Shabbat carries with it a set of do's and don'ts. The 39 melachot are a set of 39 categories of work that one is not allowed to engage in on Shabbat. These 39 categories of activities come from the actions used to build the Mishkan, the traveling worship space of the Israelites in the desert. The implication is that on Shabbat, one must exist in holy space, not work to build it. And yet I wonder, for those of us liberal Jews who don't follow strict Shabbat law, but want to find meaning in the holiness of time each week that is Shabbat, how can we lean into using physical space to support our Shabbat practices? In this week's Torah portion, we find a familiar Shabbat prayer that can lend some insight. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. The people of Israel shall keep Shabbat, observing Shabbat throughout the ages as a covenant for all time. It shall be a sign for all time between God and the people of Israel. For in 6 days Adonai made heaven and earth, and on the 7th day God ceased from work and was refreshed. We can see immediately from the text of V'shamru that traditionally when we think about Shabbat, we think about time, and we purposefully do not think about space. We famously learn from Abraham Joshua Heschel that the covenant of Shabbat is a sanctuary in time, consecrated by God. In his book, The Sabbath, Its Meaning for Modern Man, Heschel tells us, when history began, there was only one holiness in the world, holiness in time. When at Sinai the word of God was about to be voiced, a call for holiness in man was proclaimed, "Thou shalt be unto me a holy people." It was only after the people had succumbed to the temptation of worshiping a thing, a golden calf, that the erection of a tabernacle, of holiness in space, was commanded. The sanctity of time came first, the sanctity of man came second, and the sanctity of space came last. Time was hallowed by God, and space, the tabernacle, was hallowed by Moses. While Heschel's teachings clearly prioritize time as holy, his statement implies a basic human need for physical space in order for us to understand and actualize holiness. His reference to the golden calf, which is featured in this week's Torah portion, is a reminder that as elevated and as enlightened as we wish to be, humans are still creatures grounded in physicality. We believe and understand the things that we can see, taste, smell, touch, and hear. And so Shabbat may be a sanctuary in time, but instead of fighting against space, how can we actually use it to inspire our own Shabbat practices? Heschel's teaching about the holiness of space and time was inspired by an 18th century Hasidic rabbi and his commentary on the Vishamru prayer that we sing on Shabbat and that's featured in our Torah portion this week. In his work, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Ephraim looks at the Vishamru prayer and he saw within it an interesting acrostic. So if you want to turn to page 44, if you're interested, and you can look at the third line, you'll see Vishamru. And in the third line, you'll see the words, Et HaShabbat Lidorotam, meaning the Sabbath for all generations. Rabbi Ephraim notes that the combination of these words hints at an important new word. So let's start with Et, which begins with an aleph. Then you have HaShabbat, which begins with a hey, and Lidorotam, which begins with an aleph. So you put these three letters together, aleph, hey, lamed, and you get the word ohel, meaning tent. You can go ahead and close your sederim. So we have Shabbat for all generations, and we have this idea of a tent. The Hasidic teaching is arguing that Shabbat is actually a shelter for us, as alluded to before by Rabbi Goldberg, this tent of holiness that we dwell in each and every week. Now, Rabbi Chaim, of course, means this metaphorically, that Shabbat is a container of holiness that allows us to dwell in it. But what if we took his assertion literally, that in order for us to be able to engage in Shabbat, we need to find spaces that inspire the holiness of Shabbat within us? Despite the focus on holiness that can feel sort of high level, really unattainable, our tradition does recognize that on an inherent human level, we're influenced by the spaces we see around us. God commanded the Israelite people to make both the tabernacle and the temple as intricately beautiful spaces. Not because God needed a beautiful place to dwell, but rather because people needed beautiful spaces to believe that God could dwell in them. This concept of Hidor Mitzvah, beautification of a mitzvah, takes this idea even further. The rabbis teach that even if one fulfills a mitzvah by performing it simply, it's nonetheless proper to perform the mitzvah as beautifully as you possibly can. This idea comes from the recognition that things, tangible things, ritual objects transform our experiences. But I think that when it comes to Shabbat, it's not just about the beauty, but maybe it's about physicality more broadly. Yes, a beautiful sanctuary like this certainly uplifts us in prayer. But also something simple, like a clean home, can inspire calm, or a full tank of gas can create a feeling of safety. So yes, Shabbat is about time. It's about mental and emotional state of being inspired by restfulness. But maybe the key to accessing that particular state is through the spaces we create. This coming Shabbat, I'm joining together with some of my classmates to practice the detailed halacha of Shabbat as set forth by Rabbi Neuwirth in his book. We're going to practice setting timers for lights, heating water in advance, and putting away things around the house that don't inspire Shabbistic behavior, such as cell phones and work materials. We're literally going to clear the physical space from non-Shabbat items in order to make room for Shabbat to enter into the home. While I know that even as a rabbi, I will not take on a lawfully strict Shabbat practice, I'm learning to find value in these small actions that help set aside Shabbat as a time of holiness. And I'm learning that as a person who's easily influenced by the physical space around me, this means making small changes to make my surroundings feel holy for Shabbat as well. In light of my desire to create a new Shabbat practice, I put 2 new action items on my calendar for next Friday afternoon. Number 1, clean my home to prepare the space for Shabbat. And number 2, go on a walk with a friend to clear my mind for Shabbat. I believe that it's small but meaningfully attainable actions like these that have the ability to shift our Shabbat practices just a little and allow us to access true rest each week. As Reform Jews, we often see ourselves as separate from the practice of Jewish law. Our branch of Judaism has taught us that law was written by people and not God, and so we don't need to engage in practices that aren't relevant for us now in the 21st century. While this is true, we do also have the ability to take on practices that can serve us in meaningful ways. I wonder, for each of you sitting here tonight, how you might consider exploring your own Shabbat practice. How might you think about the physical space around you as holy and make your tents, your homes, your synagogue, places that can inspire holiness in you? Shabbat has the potential to transform our lives, to give us a renewed body and soul each week. We can aim to exist in Heschel's version of Shabbat as a sanctuary in time. But in this moment, it might be more relevant and more attainable for us to try and exist in Rabbi Ephraim's Shabbat, a physical Shabbat of shelter. And so I'd like to invite you to try something new for yourself over the next 24 hours. Think about the ways in which your spaces and your materials impact you, and take just one step to elevate them a little bit more. For me, it might be cleaning, and it might be going for a walk. For you, it might be something else altogether. Whatever your Shabbat practice is, and whatever your Shabbat practice may eventually become, I wish for all of us to experience this Shabbat as a moment of restful holiness here in this space together. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much for those beautiful words and for a chance for all of us to consider how we might experience Shabbat in our own lives, and for a new word, what was that? Shabbistic. Did anyone? All right, well, we're all taking it as a Leo Beck Temple community and bringing it into our space. I'm thinking a lot about Rabbi Goldberg and soon-to-be Rabbi Jacobs' description of a shelter and the holiness that we get from a shelter. And as I'm looking out at this community, thinking of the shelter that each of you has created for others over these last weeks, as so many of you have been mourning and really experiencing a sense of loss. And that part of how we create that holy shelter is by showing up for each other. When we create spaces where we're allowed to feel the fullness of the loss that we might be experiencing, or for others, the fullness of the joy that we might really be gathering with us, but also just recognizing and reaching out to someone who might just look a little extra lonely, or someone who might be struggling with something that we don't even know about. And so part of how we bring that into our communal space and ensure that we're all creating this shelter is through our Misha Berach prayer, because it's recognizing that there are people among us and that there are people outside of this space who are in need of our prayers for healing, whether that be healing of the body, or whether that is healing of the mind, or healing of the spirit. And so tonight, if there is someone that you are thinking of whom you'd like to offer our Misha Berach, our prayer for healing, I'll invite you at this time to please rise and to say their name out loud so that we can pray for their healing and also be reminded of the need to show up for you, to show up for them, and be a part of their healing. Stephen and Joseph Jacobson. We'll join together in words of healing in the middle of page 253.
Misha Berach of strength, who bless the ones before us. Help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mi shebeirach imotenu mekor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
Aleinu can be found on page 282. I'll invite those who are able to please rise.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, latet gedula leotze breshit, shelo asanu kegoye ha'aratzot, velo samanu kemishpachot ha'adama, shelo sam chelkenu kahem, vegor aleinu kechol hamonam. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. On page 287. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא, ביום ההוא, יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד, ושמו אחד, ושמו
Words to prepare us for Mourner's Kaddish are on the top of page 291. These are from Rabbi Richard Levy. It's hard to sing of oneness when the world is not complete, when those who once brought wholeness to our life have gone, and naught but memory can fill the emptiness their passing leaves behind. But memory can tell us only what we were in company with those we loved. It cannot help us find what each of us alone must now become. Yet no one is really alone. Those who live no more echo still within our thoughts and words, and what they did is part of what we have become. We do best homage to our dead when we live our lives more fully, even in the shadow of our loss. For each of our lives is worth the life of the whole world, and each one is the breath of the ultimate one. In affirming the one, we affirm the worth of each one whose life, now ended, brought us closer to the source of life, in whose unity no one is alone, and every life finds purpose. As we recite Kaddish this Shabbat, we especially remember Maria Panetta, sister of our staff member, Alvaro Jaime, and longtime LBT member, Marilyn Garber, mother to Scott Garber and Sharon Felder, and Marilyn Rose Hyman, whom death has taken from us recently. We link their names with Don Ball, Eliza Fromson Bental, Nancy Block, Clara Greenberg Braid, Minnie Brockman, Charles Brucker, Irving Brucker, Michael Cohen, Shirley Crane, Justin Danchik, Monique Friedman, Marvin Allen Geringer, David Gersten, Joshua Gluckstern Rice, Mark Godosky, Joseph Goldenberg, Howard S. Gutlin, Ruth Heckler, Lena Holes, Irving Kausman, Mary Kesden, Jewel Lamb, John Lenahan, Mark Charles Levy, Elliot Mancall, Jackie Mancall, Eva McGraw, Colin McHugh, Eve Millman, Walter Mirisch, Esther Portnow, Elaine Bonsi-Roger, Morris Rothbart, Shirley Rubenstein, Rosalind Simon, Samuel David Solway, Carol Levy Webb, Elm Weingarten, Ida Weichart, Israel Mike Weisbrod, and Anne Wolkov. If there are other names that we should add, or if I mispronounce the name of your loved one, I'll invite you to please say their name at this time. We also think of those who have died as innocent victims of violence and those who have perished protecting our country and our people's ancient home. We'll rise together as one community for Mourners Kaddish. The words can be found on page 294.
Yitkadal, v'yitkadash, shmei rabbah, ba'alma divrach chirutei, v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uvyomechon, uvchaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uvizman karev, v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mivarach le'olam olamei amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yit'aleh v'yit'halal shemei tekudisha berechu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata. Da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabbah min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru amen. Amen. Zichronam levracha. May their memories truly be a blessing to all of us. Oseh shalom b'mromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
Before we go on our Shabbat exploration, as Jessica invited us to, two very quick announcements. The first is if you enjoyed learning some Torah with her tonight, you can learn about Passover and how to enrich your Passover Seder. I know Passover seems far away, but it's coming. It's coming. So if you want to learn more about how to spice up your Seder, that's happening at 10 a.m. this Sunday in the Community Lounge with Jessica. And then this Sunday evening at 4 o'clock p.m., we'll be inviting the Reverend Zach Hoover. He's from our Interfaith Partners. He's going to be joining me and our community organizing team in conversation about the housing crisis in the state of California and looking at key legislation on how we can actually all take action to do something about it. So that's at 4 p.m. on Sunday. Wishing all of you a restful, a rejuvenating, a peaceful exploration and experience of the Shabbat. Shabbat shalom, everyone.
you have to play a song before you got the job? For sure.
Yes, that will, I think that will
Thanks, Sharon.